killed him will probably want to speak to you.
I don't know anything.
And I'd like to use you as possible bait.
It's not safe.
Is it safe?
Is it safe?
No, it's not safe. It's very dangerous.
He's probably the wealthiest and most wanted Nazi left alive.
I'm positive your brother meant to rob me when I leave the bank with my diamonds.
Oh, I don't know anything.
Well, can I trust you? You never could.
You're uncontrollable. What you offer us is valuable, but it's not worth the chaos you cause.
Where is he?
No!
Now, when the gap gets too large between what the FBI can handle effectively and what the CIA doesn't want to deal with, that's where we come in.
What do you do exactly?
We provide
Provide what?
anything.
Were you Sal's mistress?
I never even met him.
Is it safe?
Marathon Man.
Hello, welcome to Film Gold, episode 3. So this is Marathon Man, and I've got Jcrash back. He was in the intro episode, for those who've heard it. How you doing, man?
Doing well. Thanks for having me again.
For those who have heard episode 1, and we were talking about this Easy Riders, Raging Bulls thing, I won't go through it all again, but this sort of 70s Hollywood, for me, this seems to fit just so squarely in that, wouldn't you say? It's kind of got all the hallmarks.
Absolutely. And I think we even mentioned this film in our last discussion and how it might be cool to do a deep dive. And here we are.
Yeah, because we mentioned Dustin Hoffman, and obviously we're going to talk about Dustin Hoffman a lot. There's so much to talk about this. If I went through all my notes, we'd probably be here for about 6 hours. So I say this every time I do a film podcast with anybody, whether it's my podcast, someone else's. I'm constantly reining myself in. Anyway, let's get to it. So I'll just go through some of the particulars of this. So it was written by William Goldman, who, I mean, this guy's got an amazing CV, but Butch Cassidy, All the President's Men, A Bridge Too Far, Misery, and the director's John Schlesinger. And Schlesinger and Hoffman, as you were telling me earlier, have worked together before.
Right, in Midnight Cowboy, which is also one of my top films. I love that movie.
Again, it just fits squarely in this period that we're talking about. And one of the hallmarks, I think, is a kind of bleakness. We'll talk about the lighting later on, but kind of fits with that. Have you ever heard John Schlesinger speak? You ever heard of speaking?
No.
He's a very polite-sounding, well-spoken Englishman. I have the DVD. I just watched the film again last night for the first time in probably 10 years or more. And they showed some rehearsal stuff and him working on the set. He was like, if you just go over here. You got kind of the Brits on one side because you got Laurence Olivier, obviously, and then you got the Americans, and then you got a Swiss actress, Mark Keller. And just a little bit of trivia to kick us off here. Mark Keller actually, apparently, when she went into the audition, she didn't speak any English, which not sure I buy because she seemed to speak fairly well. And apparently she learned the lines phonetically for her audition. Obviously, she got the job, but the documentary I saw, she seemed to have picked up English pretty quickly. So anyway, so if we could just talk about the three main actors, just kind of outside of this film. So I think we talked about Dustin Hoffman. I mean, would you rate him as one of the all-time greats? And what would you say his strengths as an actor?
Yeah, I would definitely rate Dustin Hoffman as one of my top actors. I think of just all the great films that he's done. Starting for me was really The Graduate, which is one of my all-time favorite films. That film was made several years before I was even born. And I don't even think I really discovered the movie till I was a mid-teenager. And I think I had seen Rain Man at that point, just as a kid. And I connected with that movie. And then I saw The Graduate. And then that opened me into Midnight Cowboy and just all these other just great that Dustin Hoffman's played through his career. So, he's definitely one of my favorites.
Yeah, and I mean, we talk about eclectic actors who can play lots of different roles, but if you take, Benjamin Braddock and then Ratso Rizzo, you can't possibly think of two more. Well, probably the only similarity between them is that they're both outsiders. It's funny that they do have that commonality, but it's like, if you watch, say, Gene Hackman in The French Connection, and then if you watch The Conversation, which we've never talked about, but I'm going to guess that you're a fan of that, right? The Conversation.
I am, yes.
I mean, again, if you watch those as a kind of a double bill, you can't believe it's the same guy. I mean, Dustin Hoffman is just this, to me, is just this chameleon. And I think I've heard some interviews with him over the years. Physically, he's the little guy. But I think in his life, he always was the little guy. Like he's one of those guys who was an outsider, as I said, in his real life. And you'd never pick him for a Hollywood heartthrob.
Well, I don't know if he was ever I guess he's very endearing in The Graduate, but I don't know if he's like a heartthrob. He's always played, like you said, these odd roles, and a chameleon is a perfect adjective for him because he's just able to adapt into these characters. And I think that comes from that 60s school of method acting that was riding on the coattails of the American New Wave and the American films that have kind of followed. We discussed that in the first podcast, the evolution of these new waves and how it was kind of the Italian neorealism, the French New Wave. And it sprung a lot of actors that different approach into really absorbing the character and really just getting into this frame, living the character.
Yeah.
And that was very different from old Hollywood. And I'm sure in acting, there's always a degree of that, but I think they took it to the next level. De Niro, of course, and we mentioned the fact that this was a 1976 film, and all the great films that were coming out of that era is just wild. I mean, you had Taxi Driver, Network, and both Taxi Driver and Network were nominated for Best Picture and didn't win. So that gives you an idea of how competitive of a year that was.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a great deal of respect for the Oscars nowadays, but I think if you go back to those times, obviously there's probably like independently made films that we may never have heard of that were as good. But yeah, I mean, with the method, I guess Brando gets a lot of credit, but he will say that, he learned the method from Stella Adler. Yeah, that year, the Best Picture nominees, Rocky, All the President's Men, Bound for Glory, Network, and Taxi Driver. So, this film doesn't even get a look in. And then you've got The Omen, The Outlaw, Josie Wales, Carrie.
Brian De Palma, Carrie.
What was the one that you said?
And I just mentioned The Bad News Bears, which is just kind of seen as more of a slapsticky kind of film. But to me, it's just a great film. Walter Matthau, at his all-time best, he could have won a Best Actor award in that time. He was so great. And Rocky ends up winning the Best Picture.
Yeah. I know a lot of podcasts do this sort of awards thing at the end, but I don't really want to follow any format. So I'm going to say that basically Rocky and Network shared most of the awards. The only thing Marathon Man got nominated for was Laurence Olivier as supporting actor, and we'll get on to that.
Well, maybe in another year too, in a different year. So if it was I know 70s is pretty solid all the way around, but
yeah.
maybe a 75 or 74 Marathon
Possibly.
Man would have made the best picture cut. And I agree with you about the Academy. And I don't use that as a benchmark by any means.
Over the years, occasionally I've taken a year and I've tried to watch as many films as I can from the same year. And I think I've seen a lot from 76. Another couple, Assault on Precinct 13, which I loved.
Mm-hmm. The original?
The original, yeah. And then The Missouri Breaks. Have you ever seen that? It's a Western with Marlon Brando and Jack Nicholson.
No, I haven't, actually.
I don't think it's ever going to be rated as one of their best, either of those guys. But I think it was Arthur Penn, who, of course, did Bonnie and Clyde. It was in the days when Brando was really, what's the word, taking the proverbial out of the director and the whole business. Brando would have all these different costumes for the different scenes in Missouri Breaks. And he suddenly becomes like an Irish transvestite. His character's supposed to be a bounty hunter, and it's completely nonsensical, but that's kind of a fun film, and I love Brando and Nicholson. So, but
I've never heard of that film, so that's a good one to know.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons I love doing these podcasts with you too. We just exchange all these different movies that we haven't seen.
Absolutely, yeah. I wanted to ask you about Laurence Olivier, and I'm not going to ask you to represent America because that's a lot of people for you to generalize about. But do you think the average American would know much about Laurence Olivier? Because, I mean, really, he's sort of a legend in England, perhaps not to a modern audience, but is he?
Well, I was going to say, I think that depends on now. I think if you ask your average 20-year-old who's Laurence Olivier, I don't think they could tell you. I mean, I think I'm kind of on the bottom end of the age range or generational range that is familiar with Laurence Olivier. And I think we knew him as that distinguished British actor, the Shakespearean series that he's done. He's done, different Shakespearean. He was very well-trained, high-level type aristocratic-y actor.
He was originally a stage actor, and he transferred to films.
Yeah.
As you said, he's probably most famous for, Henry V, Hamlet, Richard III was a big one. I think if I went through his filmography, there's probably not that many. I mean, I remember Rebecca, which is an Alfred Hitchcock film, very early one, 1940. And then I love the film Sleuth. That's another one, in fact, I'm going to be reviewing on this podcast. He did that with Michael Caine, and then he did The Boys from Brazil.
Yeah, Boys from Brazil. I think I just know him more from the later films and when he did kind of branch out into more American-made cinema. Although Schlesinger himself, like you said, was English, so it was an interesting, for Marathon Man, contrast of the English style and the American style.
Absolutely, yeah. Schlesinger and Olivier on one side, and then Hoffman and Scheider. Yeah, I was saying with Laurence Olivier, he was actually terminally ill when he made this film, and he was uninsurable. He had cancer, he had gout, he had various things. And again, this might sound a bit fanciful, but on the documentary I watched from the DVD, they were saying that the joy of this film, or maybe the joy of just being in Hollywood and having this sort of renaissance, he lived another 13 years. He died in 1989. I wouldn't credit it all to this film, but it was such an interesting bunch of people. And then you got Roy Scheider, and again, I probably haven't seen loads of his films, but looking at his filmography, I mean, there's four that absolutely leap out, which is Clute and The French Connection, which is the same year, and then obviously Jaws just a year before this, and then this film, and then I guess later All That Jazz, but I haven't actually seen, I saw it once, I think, I don't remember that, but solid actor, right?
He's great in All That Jazz. It's not a film I love particularly. It's made by the, I can't even remember the,
Bob
threw
Fosse.
me off, but Bob Fosse, yeah. The famous stage director. It's sort of a weird self-indulgent thing, and I don't love everything about that film, but Scheider just he plays it 100%.
Yeah.
That you believe he's this person. To me, he was just an iconic actor, an iconic face, presence.
Yeah. I knew him as a kid because I was obsessed with Jaws. And in those days, before we had a video recorder, you'd have to wait 2 or 3 years for a film to come on TV. And every time, I would obsessively check. In England, we had the Radio Times and the TV Times. Just for English listeners of a certain age, you might be listening to this. Radio Times still exists, and it had all the listings. And when suddenly it's that thing that nowadays we just have everything on tap. You don't have to wait for anything. But in those days, I'd get the Radio Times every week, and then every 2 years, be like, oh my God, Jaws is on. And you'd watch it, and you wouldn't have a video recorder, so you'd have to wait again. And it was... You can't describe the anticipation of it. And what I loved about Scheider is that he had this kind of beat up face, with a kind of slightly squashed nose. And I actually found out, I didn't know this, he used to be a boxer, which didn't surprise me at all. But then in Jaws, of course, very well, he's this kind of grizzled cop. Somebody actually said that his character in Jaws could have been his character in French Connection, relocated to this island.
True.
And in Jaws, he's afraid of the water, so he's got that vulnerability. So I just always remember Roy Scheider's part of my youth,
He's one of those guys, too, that probably people, even like we talked about Laurence Olivier, how familiar is Laurence Olivier to the average American at this point in time?
Yeah.
I think if you showed them a picture of Scheider, they may not know his name, but they would go, oh, that guy.
Yeah.
He was in Jaws. He was in, he's an iconic face, and just, he kind of represents every average guy that's seen some shit. It just radiates from him and really just draws him into the audience, or the audience into him.
Absolutely. But, in Jaws, he's not really, although you kind of got the sense Chief Brody was probably a tough guy because he was a New York cop who's transferred to Amity, on the East Coast of America. Suddenly he's in this town where nothing's really happening. Like there's no crime to speak of apart from if you call a shark eating people a crime, I guess you need the police. But yeah, I mean, I said I watched the film not Jaws. We should go back onto Marathon Man. I watched Marathon Man last night, and I just absolutely loved this film. And it was one of those films that I was just loving it more and more the more I was watching it. And has it actually featured on your list that you've been counting down on YouTube?
It's in the second 100, but a couple of weeks ago I watched it again, and I was like, okay, wow, this movie needs to be up higher on my list. And I have a problem with that sometimes. I want every movie to be in the top 100, the movies that I really like. But Marathon Man, it's such a deep, complex film, and it has so many layers to it. And I remember seeing Marathon Man at a young age. It's a film that spooked me a lot, and it just never lost, maybe because it was special to me at the time I saw it, but it's one of the best films that I think has ever been made, personally. Oh. It just has it all.
Yeah. Since we're talking about three actors, we'll get into the plot in a second, but I don't know what to say really about the three actors. They're just all, for me, completely believable. I mean, I guess the only unbelievable thing which people have always picked up on with this film is that Hoffman was 38 when he made it, and we're supposed to buy him as a kind of a PhD or a graduate student. But I think Dustin Hoffman has always looked younger, and he actually looks very young. I mean, I would have picked him for probably 28 rather than 38 if someone asked me to guess his age. He looks a bit too old to be a student. And what I didn't really understand is that Roy Scheider's character must be about the same age as Roy Scheider, presumably. So he must be quite a bit older than his brother in the film. I mean, it doesn't really matter. It's not a huge issue, but...
Well, I don't think you don't know when somebody could have been in grad school. I mean, he could have been in grad school at 28. Especially, given his past as a character and all the different things that happened politically with his family. Yeah, I get the sense that Doc was definitely the older brother by at least 5, 6, 7 years.
And they have this interesting thing where Hoffman's obviously is a pacifist, is an idealist. The sort of family history is that their father, I think, was persecuted in the McCarthy witch trials.
Yes.
And apparently, I think the father committed suicide, and Dustin Hoffman's characters kept the gun in his apartment. Yes. And weirdly enough, there's a kind of a redemption story going on here because If you notice, I didn't pick up on this, but I have to credit this podcast. I don't remember the name of it, unfortunately, but they were saying that Dustin Hoffman in this movie, if you notice, he's always running. Not only is he jogging, but when he's in college, he's running, like he's running to his class. And it's very, very interesting. I love the marathon metaphor. I really like it. What do you think the symbolism of the marathon and the running is? Is it something we can put our finger on?
Well, I think you could sit and discuss some different theories about that. It's, down to a physical level. He is a runner. The film opens with him running around Central Park and, timing himself. And the one runner taunts him. Yeah. And then he's trying to catch up with this guy, and he's just trying to get to some place, whether it's through his running or get to the answers regarding his father in all connections and the things, whether or not he was innocent. There's just this desire in him. And there's a lot of pain involved with that, the mental and the physical that, kind of is captured through the running. Yeah. But interestingly, I think, too, you could take the concept of Marathon Man to another level. And we mentioned some of the films that were up this year, or that year in 1976. You had Network, which was, to me, probably one of the top films ever. Right. And it really took on the media and the media's role and the production and the presentation and how it's manipulated to project these ideas. And then you had All the President's Men, which was a whole film about Woodward Bernstein, the whole Nixon Watergate scandal. And then you had a film like Marathon Man that was still talking about Nazis and how the government's working with, harboring these Nazis and what's really going on. It was a time in politics in the U.S. and maybe globally for that matter, because there was a lot going on, internationally. But for America, we just had gone through World War II. We had been going through Vietnam and all these things that had happened, and sort of the veil was kind of being lifted off of all these ugly truths that had been going on for 25 to 30 years, almost the amount of miles in a marathon. It's like we've just been on this marathon in history. Yeah. Sort of when you're getting to the end, there's all these struggles and there's scandals and there's the tearing down of this veil, and that's what you have to go through to get across that finish line. So I think that's what is maybe another level of symbolism behind the film.
Wow. Yeah, I was thinking about, I was trying to think of other films that had like running in them. There's an old British film from the early 60s called The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner. And it was part of what they call the kitchen sink drama era of Britain, which again was to do with realism. But the interesting thing is that in that film, the main character is kind of a kid who's born on the wrong side of the tracks, and he ends up in a borstal, like a remand center. And for him, the running is pure freedom. It's the only time where he feels free, like he enjoys the running. And it's interesting to contrast because, as you said, the opening scene is Hoffman being overtaken by a guy who's obviously he's taller, he's sort of more good-looking, he's fitter. And that's what I'm saying. Hoffman is brilliant at playing, like, quote-unquote, the little guy, the guy with all the odds, like, stacked against him. So I think it symbolizes struggle, and like you said, people can read into it. It's open to interpretation, but something to do with reaching the finish line, as you said. And I think in the end, it's very interesting. I was going to mention this later, but I really want to make some points now so I don't forget. Very interesting. In the very last scene, when Hoffman throws a gun away, he's walking. He's strolling around that same place, and everybody else is running. And when I was watching it last night, that kind of hit me. Unfortunately, it's taken, killing somebody. And of course, he doesn't actually kill Zell. In the book, he actually takes him to Central Park and shoots him in cold blood. Yeah. But Hoffman has used his father's gun, and I think that's where the sort of closure comes.
And he throws the gun into the water.
Exactly.
Hurls the gun over the fence, and that's sort of like the closure, him completing the marathon, if you will. One of the things that I think is interesting about the Hoffman character in the marathon symbolism, the character is named Babe, and he's just kind of this kid that wants to find the answer. You know, he's curious. He's very naive, and he doesn't understand the complexity and the depth to which all this stuff is going on under his nose. He thinks his brother's in the oil business, and he my dad was innocent, and I'm going to prove it. Just all the naivety of youth, and I think that mirrors the naivety that we had in the time and sort of the breaking down of the veil. And I think Babe, his name is Babe. He's a baby. He's innocent. And I think he represents sort of us as the audience. And he goes through all this stuff, and then he finds out, oh, my God, my brother is a fucking spy. There's Nazis. This guy's drilled into my mouth. I mean, what is going on? My dad, maybe he wasn't innocent. Who knows? At the end, he's like, and he's just exhausted. But it's broken down this layer of innocence that he had, which is, I think, what we as Americans in that time. Now, this was before I was born, so I don't really know. But I, historically could see that was something we were experiencing collectively as a society at that time.
I think the only difference between my view and maybe, I don't know, the popular view is that this 70s period is supposed to be this kind of paranoia period. You had the Parallax View with Warren Beatty that I haven't seen for years, but I know more or less what that's about. My argument, and from talking to you, I feel like you're aware of this, I don't think that's actually stopped. You were saying that network has exposed the media, but I think people still more or less get their worldview from what they see. Well, it used to be what they read in the newspaper, but now it would be what they see on mainstream websites. Because call me a cynic, but I have studied this kind of thing, and I don't think anything's really changed. I think the public is still naive, and I know I'm not going to make myself very popular by saying that, but just to give you an example, whether the American president, and again this applies to Britain, whether it's Obama who's fairly popular or Trump who's fairly unpopular, I'm going to say with liberals, because obviously there's a hell of a lot of people that do like Trump, there's a machine that goes on in the background. And as you said, Doc, the Roy Scheider character, is working for this agency. And I think the other guy, what's his name? Janey.
Yeah. We didn't even talk about him yet.
I know, yeah.
But go on. I don't want you to lose this thought.
No, we'll get there. Don't worry. We'll get there. I think he says that we work for this agency that does what the FBI and the CIA don't want to do, like when they don't want to get their hands dirty. Yeah. The thing is that the machine, the military industrial complex, the war machine, all this stuff is still going on. Like, people tag the 70s and say, oh, this was this realism era. And then as if like all of that stuff that goes on that we never see as magic.
Yeah, it went away. Yeah.
And all that happened is that in the 80s, the corporations took over the narrative.
Well, even Network has that scene, and we're getting off on different
Don't worry, go for it.
But Network has that scene where, Howard Beale goes into, and it's Ned Betty is the corporate giant. And he said, there are no countries. Yeah. There's Exxon. And he names all these corporations that are, and he's all, and you have meddled with the forces of nature.
Yeah.
And it's just this thing, but that's why you could watch Network now. And what was the message? We're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore. And it's just human nature that we recycle, and we make these, it's just rebranding of the same package, a fresh bow or a piece of wrapping paper on it.
I mean, it's interesting because Network was obviously hailed by the Academy. And right. I always used to think, well, why would the Academy want to promote a film that's telling people that the media is manipulating their lives? And then I suddenly thought, yes, but the Peter Finch character, when he says mad, he's obviously saying angry, but he's treated as a madman. So that's
correct.
the message,
the Mad Prophet,
yeah, the message is kind of 50%. The media is manipulating you, but 50%. But the guy who's really telling you the truth is basically a mad guy who has a breakdown, and So, if you don't mind, we'll go back to Marathon Man because I would love to talk to you.
Oh yeah.
I'd love to talk to you about this for 4 hours, and maybe we can on my new podcast. I've got a third podcast starting this week, which is going to be the final one where we've got a completely open forum. But let's talk about Laurence Olivier. Again, I think he's just spectacular in this film. I just totally buy him as this sort of cold Nazi. I mean, it starts, of course, with him shaving his head or cutting his hair.
Yeah.
He just looks a cold-eyed Nazi.
The light, everything, about the tone, the lighting, the angles, and also editing, how they capture how meticulous he is. And every shirt is perfectly folded, and he's taking it out and gently placing it in the suit. And then that shows the attention to his detail in his, his
grooming
disguise, so to speak, and everything's perfectly shaved. And then even in the torture scenes, he meticulously comes in, he lays out his tools, he rolls up his sleeves. There's this sterility to his character that reflects his sociopathic basic demeanor. The guy was he's a complete lunatic, and he was putting out the impression that he's just very put together and very organized and very professional, and that somehow he's above everyone, and so that somehow justifies his actions.
I'd like to talk about the dentist scene a bit later. We'll just look at a few scenes, but it's almost more chilling, like you said, because he's not screaming and shouting. You're absolutely right. I mean, there's the lighting, the editing, the angles, but it must also be Laurence Olivier. I mean, it's just that that look in his eye. It's that cold look and the measured delivery. And obviously, this is what Laurence Olivier was good at, because Laurence Olivier spent years and years on the stage. And I've done a little bit of stage acting, and I'm sure film acting is very hard, probably because you have to wait around for hours and then you have to snap into it. But stage acting is another type of difficulty in that you have to concentrate for hours, and you've got to hold these positions and this concentration, and you remember all this dialogue. And so,
well, that was what I was going to say, is that it's the stage side of it is so dialogue driven. And if you really think about dialogue in Marathon Man, it's pretty sparse. I mean, most of it is the way he looks, the emotion that he's putting out, that look in his eyes, as you say. And so much of it was captured without really even saying anything.
Yeah.
A lot of it, you don't even know really who he is, or that's testament to the pacing of the movie. I think the thing works great. It doesn't give away the story right away. You piece together these clues, even as all this crazy stuff's happening. It all kind of comes together. And they didn't pound it over your head. Oh, here's Zell. He's a Nazi. Not with a little Nazi pillow over his head. You didn't know who this guy was, but you knew something was going on with him.
Absolutely. This might be a good point to talk about Hoffman and Olivier working together, because obviously you've got two utterly polar opposites. Olivier's from the stage tradition, and he's very, very reliant on the script. He was amazing. Managing to learn a full-length Shakespeare play for a start must be incredible. And Brando and Olivier never made a film together. I'm sure at some point it was touted, but just to give you an idea of Dustin Hoffman. So the idea of the method in Dustin Hoffman's eyes is that everything has to be organic and that you have to live this part. So, for example, when he was doing the running, there's the scene later on where he escapes after the dental scene.
The chase,
Yeah, the chase. And his character manages to get away by utilizing, obviously his marathon running. Hoffman, when he wanted to get out of breath, would apparently do an hour of skipping jump rope. And, I do like 5-10 minutes, and I'm absolutely 10 minutes I'm on the floor, Another scene, he didn't sleep for 3 nights, but he did let slip that he hadn't been just like sitting at home for 3 nights. He'd been out at Studio 54 and, the nightclubs and stuff. But the famous line is, Hoffman and Olivier are on the set, and Olivier says, "Oh, you're out of breath or something." And Hoffman says, "Oh, yeah, I've just been running for an hour to get ready for the scene." And Olivier says, "Well, why don't you just try acting?"
Right.
And in fairness, Hoffman said that was taken out of context. That Olivier did say that, but he'd actually been giving some examples of when he did something similar on the stage. Anyway, but my question to you is it harder work to get yourself exhausted by running for an hour, or is it harder work to try to learn how to give that illusion without doing it? Where would you stand there?
I'm not an actor, and I never have been. I'm a musician, but, it just depends on the flavor of what you're doing. It's like if you're to music, it's what does the song call for? Sometimes the song calls for some kind of extravagant guitar solo, and sometimes it just calls for gentle strumming.
Yeah.
And however you get into that mode, you feel the mood. And, I've played with plenty of people who, they'll need a half hour to warm up, and, they'll be in the back room just, doodling on the guitar, where I've been with other people that just like, let's hit the stage, and they bang it out on a live performance. They don't want to get too into the groove because they want to save that for the performance. So I think it's it's really the artist's choice and how they do it best.
Yeah.
I have a tendency to really dive into what I'm doing as an artist, a different type of artist. So personally, I would probably lean more towards the method approach.
Yeah, I feel like I would as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps not to that extreme.
Well, there's so many things you have to do for a role, or potential things you have to do. Have to grow your hair long. Maybe you have to buzz your head. Maybe you have to wear a beard. You don't. Maybe you're a clean cut character, or you're a scruff. It's hard to just separate your person from that, and you have to step out of your daily roles and into this other role that may not be you, but is traces of you in there.
Yeah. Someone like De Niro, De Niro in his, what I would consider his prime, 70s basically. Probably up to the 90s in fairness. He would be known as a kind of disciple of Brando, kind of a method actor, but he was quite an interesting case because, for example, with Taxi Driver, I have no doubt that he would have spent some time trying to get in the headspace of Travis Bickle, but he also took very practical steps. So he did a lot of preparation, and in fact, he became a taxi driver briefly. Mm-hmm. And then when he made Raging Bull, again, I'm sure he tried to feel it as much as possible, but he boxed 1,000 rounds with Jake LaMotta, and he actually fought 3 times professionally as a middleweight. So it's an interesting one. I feel like if it was me, I would probably try and find something in the middle, because I think, in a way, Hoffman and Olivier are 2 extremes. Being a stage actor, I did a little bit of stage acting, and we did a very much an abridged Shakespeare play. And even then, it's so nerve-wracking because it's almost like another language, really. The idea of improvising when you're doing like Hamlet or something is pretty much off the table, right?
Right.
So,
right.
But it was such an interesting contrast. But I think they got on okay, and I wonder whether maybe they learned a bit from each other. I don't know whether they met in the middle somehow.
Well, I don't think it really matters how you get there, as long as when you're laying it down, when you're cutting tape, how does it work? I mean, you've got certain people they can just sit down at a piano. And I have a real young nephew, and he just sits at the keyboard and he just visualizes it. He's learning now formally a little, about keys and notes and all these things, but visually he just has the goods, and he can do probably what adults would sit down and have to take forever to hone. So some people just have a gift of doing certain things a certain way, and you go, gosh, it's so easy. It seems so easy for them, but really what they've done, though, too, is they've honed their craft. They've practiced what they're good at in a different way.
Yeah.
You know, you're talking about the Shakespearean roles and everything, and think about the memory and actually learning the language. Like you say, Shakespeare to many is just like a foreign language. So actually understanding the language and what's being conveyed and what you're saying in this language, that is, you have to internalize what the character's trying to say or is saying, even though it's in this weird syntax and everything. You know, it's different.
Yeah, very interesting. Apparently, at the end of shooting, they had a kind of a ceremony for Laurence Olivier on his final day of shooting. And apparently, Olivier gave Hoffman, he said, "I've got a gift to you." And it was a box. And inside the box was an edition of, it wouldn't be the complete works of Shakespeare, but some Shakespeare folio with all of Laurence Olivier's penciled notes that he'd used when he was playing all these roles. And Dustin Hoffman was like, wow, you know, what a gift. So I think in the end, they both had a positive experience. Just talk about one more actor, Roy Scheider, as we mentioned him earlier, but I mean, you said it best. He's a badass, you know, in this. He looks like he could rip your head off with his bare hands, you know? Perhaps we'll talk about one scene now. I mean, this fight scene. So he's on the balcony. It's in Paris, isn't it?
In the hotel, yeah.
There's some music playing. Go on, you talk about it.
Yeah.
I'll chip in.
Well, yeah, there's like a parade going on. There's all these things going on in that scene that I think he goes out on the balcony. You can tell this is shot in the hotel room. This isn't like where they CGI'd the Eiffel Tower behind them. I mean, they probably went in each one of these hotel room on that street and said, okay, which is the perfect frame for the Eiffel Tower in the back. So it's very calculated. And then there's this parade happening while they're doing this live shot. And I mean, you can see the parade, you know, and the Eiffel Tower. And then there's the man out in the wheelchair across the street. And that's sort of like a nod to Hitchcock, you know, and he's sitting in the wheelchair and he's watching this murder. And he's telling the nurse, and she's like, no, come back in. And there's all this crazy stuff happening. I mean, there's so much going on in that scene.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It's spectacular.
Yeah, I mean, he's on the balcony. I think he's having a drink, or he's just kind of relaxed having a drink. And then you see the curtain kind of fluttering. Now you kind of know, when you get what the flavor of this film is, you can kind of expect there's going to be something pretty nasty about to happen. But I think juxtaposition is a fantastic tool in any sort of art form, music as well. And when you've got all these kind of innocent things going on, I mean, I was telling you about this Australian movie called Snowtown that I'm going to review on this podcast fairly soon. I won't go into a big tangent, but they're torturing this guy and they say, turn the TV on to sort of mask the noise. But it's that juxtaposition of the innocence of the guy just talking on the TV about something completely inconsequential, and then you've got this horrible shit going on. But the henchman's got this what do you call that wire thing you use to strangle?
Yeah, the wire. I don't know
what it's called. I was trying to find out if they had a name, but yeah.
It's so perfect that he uses the wire too, because it adds to that just grittiness of the whole thing. And then he sticks his hand up and you just feel the wire like slicing your hand.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, and then he just brutally breaks the dude's back and neck, you know, and you're like, wow. The tension in Marathon Man, it's perfectly in tune. The tension that's created throughout the film, because you know this guy's kind of tailing him, but it leads up to the fact that the guy may come in the hotel room when the porter comes in the room and says, oh, we had this problem with this key or whatever. So you kind of know, oh, maybe something's going to happen. The foreshadowing of everything. And you think maybe that's when he's going to get attacked, but it's not.
Yeah.
You know, and it's similar to the other scene in Paris when he goes to the opera and of course he finds the guy murdered and then he makes arrangements to meet the other woman agent. And he goes out and he's in this long hall with all the columns. He's on the outside of the building and there's sort of a fountain kind of in the background. And you feel like, oh my gosh, something is going to happen. And it doesn't. And they end up like somebody kicks a
football.
or a soccer ball down the way. And he's like, okay, I got to get out of here. And then he gets out and nothing happens. But then when you go into the scene with him and Zell, when they meet in the States and they meet out in that fountain, and then there's this different kind of brooding lighting and they're meeting. And then when Zell stabs and kills Doc, or stabs him, you're caught off guard by it because the previous scene brought your tension up but then dropped it with nothing. So you go into the next tension building scene, you sense tension, but you're not ready for the actual stabbing when it happens. And all those scenes are connected. The foreshadowing, the build up, the rise of the tension.
Yeah. I noticed something as well, that you said of football, which is obviously like something a kid would play with. And then just a few minutes earlier, you'd seen the bomb that was like hidden inside that doll. And you saw that amazing close-up to the doll's eye. And you think of a doll and a football, you're talking about two like kids' toys, basically.
Right.
It just makes it more sinister. Like nowadays, I think, again, I'm generalizing, but too many films nowadays, you just make it too obvious. This one, that 70s period, they just nailed this kind of this push and pull thing with the audience. You give them kind of a red herring with the football, and then pretty much straight after that, and in the hotel, as you said, just go back to the hotel for a second. The other thing is that he's also half naked. All he's got on is a pair of shorts, and you can see how like completely ripped like Roy Scheider is. And I said earlier, didn't I used to be a boxer. I didn't know that, but that totally.
Well, and he's doing, in the first part of the scene, he's doing push-ups.
Exactly.
So, like, all right, this he's a badass. Like, what's going on here? But he's so properly dressed and professional, and he goes out, he brings the chocolates, and he puts the diamonds in the chocolates. It's similar to the Olivier character in that regard, the meticulousness of the profession, I think, or something about, like, you could tell he's just a professional all the way around.
Yeah, could be something to do with like the coldness of business, because those two are kind of quote unquote businessmen, and they're in a really dirty business. And Hoffman, his babe, is like, the two brothers, they love each other, but they're so opposite in that Doc comes and he's going, oh, you're still in this filthy apartment, because obviously Babe's a student, he's not a professional, hasn't got a lot of money. But Doc and Zell, when they meet in the fountain, like you say, it's two businessmen. It just so happens that they're in a dirty business. Also, the knife. There's a big difference between shooting somebody with a gun, I mean, like cinematically, and like when it's a knife, and you see all the blood. And I don't want to gross the audience out, but it's so visceral. And
it's not just a knife; it's this wristband that he wears, and this knife like comes out of it. It's like how psychopathic, and he puts it on. You don't know what it is at first, but you see him. And when he's packing and he puts his wristband on and you don't know, and then all of a sudden it's a switchblade. And like you said, it is a dirty business, and the film looks dirty a lot of the time. It has a filth on it that's visible and captured in the tone. And it's just reflected in a lot of what you're told and then what reality ends up being. And it's those themes are delivered in an espionage type format,
Yeah, and obviously they use this Steadicam as well.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think 3 films, well, no, this one wasn't nominated for Best Picture, but 3 of the major films for that year. The first one was Bound for Glory, which we said earlier was nominated. That was the first use of the Steadicam, or the first one that was released. And then this, and then Rocky in the same year. But if you think about how it was used in Rocky, it's so different from this, because they use the Steadicam in that somebody's walking down the street and the Steadicam gives the illusion that they might be being followed, or there's nobody you can trust in this film. That's why maybe one of the things that I didn't really buy was the romance. That seemed very obvious that, she wasn't really into him. That was part of the setup. They had some good chemistry, but I didn't really buy that. But the rest of it, all the stuff down the street, in New York. And
oh, man. Epic scenes. Well, we talked about the parade scene and the hotel scene. juxtapose that against the Zell. He gets his diamonds, and then he tries to get them appraised, and he's nervous, and he's looking at the camera. And I haven't read too much into it, but to me, it looks very natural. Like, this is a day they go in with the Steadicam, they follow him into the jeweler. I'm sure they probably did some lighting in there and probably picked a time of day that was a good time to shoot. Yeah. And then there's also Zell going down when the guy recognizes him. The old man.
And the old woman as well.
And the woman, she's like, Zell! And yelling at him across the street. And that's what the editing is so awesome, because there's this combination of the Steadicam following. So you're the guy that's following Zell. You see him up ahead, and there's just hundreds of people packed on the sidewalk, and the Steadicam's just weaving in and out of them, following. So you're that guy, and then it shifts to the next shot is like a tracking shot down the other sidewalk, following him from the woman's perspective who sees him across the street. Then you're Zell. And it's just the way they were able to capture that in so much natural day-to-day life that was just happening around the city. That city's going, she's screaming. There's people looking. I mean, it looks like, damn, you're right in the streets of New York City.
Yeah. I kind of got goosebumps when I hear that woman, because you're talking about, a Jewish lady recognizing a Nazi. I mean, the depth of emotion that evokes. And when they're in the diamond shop, obviously Zell sees he's got the tattoo, the Auschwitz, the concentration camp tattoo. On the subject of New York, I mean, I've only ever been to New York once. I went for one weekend. I actually went to Boston, and then we went to New York for a weekend. I just love New York. I mean, Midnight Cowboys, New York, Taxi Driver the same year, and I was saying to you, remember earlier, I was saying, Travis Bickle could have been driving his taxi on that exact street at that exact moment,
You're right. Great observation.
Ratso Rizzo, Hoffman, a few years earlier, could have been on those streets, New York just has a magic in the cinema to me that I think London has a bit of it as well. Obviously, I'm English, and I used to live in London, so London's got that kind of connection for me. But
sure.
I feel like we should probably talk about the plot, maybe. I'm going to guess, though, that, if people listen to a film podcast, it seems weird to listen to it without watching the film first. So you've got to presume that the audience has seen this film first. But it's a film that's full of intrigue. So I'll just go very briefly. You've got Babe, and his brother is Roy Scheider. Interesting, their names are Babe and Doc. I don't know whether there's any symbolism there, but their father, as we said earlier, was involved in the McCarthy witch trials and then ended up committing suicide. So Hoffman is studying history, following in his father's footsteps. Doc has obviously taken another route and is ostensibly an oil company executive, but we know obviously he isn't. He's working for this arm of the government. And I mean, what's the deal? Are they harboring Nazis? Is Zell giving them information about Nazis on their behalf? Is that what the deal is?
Yes, and then in return, he's guaranteed, a certain safety. But then there's just this distrust, because they're both working with what they were fighting against,
I see, yeah.
Decades prior. And it's sort of an extension of that. And it's, double and triple crosses. And it's just the paranoia that is happening. But the way that they were so integrally worked together is really pretty deep story.
That's what I mean. I mean, there's just nobody. Babe is obviously, I mean, you said like kind of childlike. He's the innocent bystander. But I'd love to go on a kind of tangent about Operation Paperclip. But all I'm going to say is that if anyone's never heard of Operation Paperclip, it's worth just, doing some basic research. And it was the idea that although they had like the Nuremberg trials and a lot of Nazis were hung, a lot of other ones were allowed into the US and in fact into the USSR as well.
South America was a big haven for Nazi defectors.
Exactly, yeah. And of course there is a theory that's kind of written off as a conspiracy theory that Hitler in fact escaped to Argentina. I've never really looked into that myself. I suppose the most famous case that people would have heard of was Werner von Braun, who ended up being a big player in NASA and was involved with the Apollo 11, the movie. That's a Nazi,
A lot of the Nazi scientists came over to the, and that's declassified documents. Yeah, people can take that as far as you want to go and develop your theories around that. But it was a reality. And I think even Zell's character, I can't remember the actual man's name, but they called him the Angel of Death. And he was a guy that they took the gold and the diamonds out of the teeth of these people in the concentration camps. And, so there's a lot of free will taken with the story, so to speak, but it's also based on a lot of facts and a lot of facts that we really don't know the actual details about. So, I mean, the film in a way is just presenting a different theory around it, that these are the connections.
The guy you were talking about was, I think he's Mengele. I don't know how you pronounce his name. Joseph Mengele or Mengele, and he was... Yeah. But I mean, the association's clear because his nickname was the Angel of Death, and Zell's nickname is the White Angel. So, I mean, there's no way there's no way that they're not making at least an allusion to it,
For sure.
So it's a very murky plot, and as we said earlier, I mean, the lighting, the washed-out colors, which is very typical of the 70s, there's nothing really bright in this film at all, both thematically and in terms of the lighting itself. Perhaps we could just go through a few more scenes. We have to really talk about the opening scene. So it's this kind of road rage thing. It's obviously a Jewish guy, and it's Zell's brother. So again, it's the Jew and Nazi.
Sort of sets up the cat and mouse game that's taking place.
Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, it's quite a scary scene, but do you think maybe it's a little bit cartoonish? I mean, I was listening carefully. He calls him a Nazi bastard, and then he starts he calls him a Mercedes bastard, and then obviously, like, you've got the fuel truck quite conveniently, they're side by side in this road rage incident, screaming at each other, and then this fuel truck happens. Do you think it's effective?
Maybe it was a little over the top. It was trying to show, obviously, you didn't know who this little old guy was. You didn't know what he was doing. He was getting these diamonds, or he got the key, and it had to set up that connection, but it also had to kind of present the backdrop of the connection between the Germans and the Jewish population there. He's calling him a Nazi. We don't know. So I think it served its purpose for setting up the story and also presenting the car chase and that as a metaphor of what was to come.
It's like the whole film is a kind of a car crash, really. It's not going to...
Well, that's true.
It's not going to end well.
Yeah, but you can't look away at the same time. And I think the cinematography of the car chase is brilliant. It's these two old guys, and it's kind of intense. You're like, well, what's going on in this movie? First, there's this guy running, then there's these old men arguing, and then the next is Doc in Paris. It's like you're sort of like getting all these different setups happening and introductions to these different characters. I've never read the book. I don't know if you have.
No, I haven't. But the guy who wrote the script is William Goldman, who wrote the book as well. I'd like to read it. I mean, I don't think it would lose anything since we've seen the film, because I think it's probably quite similar. But I definitely would like to read that. The other thing about New York, before I forget, if you notice, there's always unrest happening. At the beginning, there's strikes, something about maybe an environmental movement. But there's always unrest. And again, it serves to sort of give this film this thing that there's never going to be any really calm moments. Obviously, there's a little bit of, as I said, the romance that I didn't totally buy between Elsa and Babe. That's kind of nice. They have a couple of flirty scenes, but there's not going to be anything really heartwarming in this film, unfortunately. As much as it would be nice, nowadays they might be tempted to sort of tag a Hollywood ending on there, as they call it, but...
I mean, Babe makes it out, but pretty much his whole world is flipped upside down and he's just jaded, which I guess could be attributed to just growing up and really understanding that certain things are a reality, even though we don't want them to be.
Yeah. As I said earlier, I think there's a slight sense of redemption in the end. Maybe he's found some closure with this thing with the gun and his father and everything. But yeah, a scene that you mentioned earlier when Zell kills Doc, when you see Scheider when he gets stabbed, I mean, that's a look of genuine shock and horror. It's like shock, surprise, and horror on his face. And they obviously did something with his face because he suddenly looks like really pale, like he's seen a ghost or something, you know?
Like a ghost, yeah. Impactful. And then, you know, of course he comes in. And then the scenes that follow there, I mean, one of the actors I wanted to talk about, William Devane plays Janie. I love William Devane. He's another one of those character actors that just he has such a distinct voice and his delivery, and he is phenomenal in the film as a, you know, supporting sort of role. You know, he comes in and introduces himself to Babe, and he's like, you know, my friends call me Janie. And he's like, I'm not your friend. But he's like, oh, we're going to use you, you know, use you as bait. So Hoffman thinks he's safe. Is it safe? He thinks he's safe, and he's in the tub, you know, and that's another great scene for me is when he's in the bathtub and the door's cracked open and he can hear the guys come into his apartment. And he's in the bathtub and he's like, you know, slides up and then he shuts the door and he's screaming like, help. You know, the tension, then it's actually that, you know, Janie isn't his friend, and Babe's natural intuition was correct when then he realizes that it's all a presentation to give him a different perception of reality.
Something about the bathtub, you know, the fact that he's naked as well. I'm probably reading too much into it, but you know what I mean? He's naked and vulnerable because people have used bathtubs, and obviously, you know, the shower in Psycho. I mean, I don't think that's a coincidence. I'm sure people like William Goldman, the screenwriter, I'm sure they all loved Hitchcock. I can't believe they wouldn't. But yeah, it's the thing, like, because he's in this really run-down apartment, you gradually see like the wood kind of splitting. It's the ominous thing because it's not played for a big shock. It's more of a slow creep of terror and paranoia.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so great about the film, because the film is violent and shockingly violent at times. But then there's these other times where it, like the torture scene, you don't have to show the drill going into the pulp of the tooth. Yeah. You know, you don't have to have a zoom shot on that. The camera shifts up to the light, and all you hear is him just screaming, you know, in the pain. It's so effective because it uses the graphic violence in shocking terms, and the build-up and tension scenes are equally as horrifying, but far less graphic. So it has, by not being graphic in some of those scenes and making a slower build-up, like you say, and then contrasting that with Zell just cutting the guy's throat and throwing him in the trash can. I mean, it's like, wow. Or Zell stabbing Doc. Or it gets graphic, but then it also builds in the suspense. So you're expecting, oh my gosh, there's going to be, and then it's not. And then when the real wallop comes, it just shakes you.
Good segue to the dentist scene, because a couple of things you'll get a kick out of this. You were saying earlier about Zell, the Laurence Olivier character, is very meticulous. What actually happened was when they were getting ready to film the dentist scene, Laurence Olivier, he saw a gardener clipping roses. You know, obviously actors are probably naturally very observant for small details. He was watching this guy clipping the roses so meticulously and carefully that he incorporated that idea into his role. And the other thing was...
Wow, I didn't know that.
It's really clever, the way to take something so innocent as clipping roses and transplant it into that scene. The other thing I love about it is that when he's leaning Hoffman back, there's a bit where he says, oh, you really should take care of your teeth. And that's exactly what the dentist would say to a kid. You know, when you went to the dentist as a kid, have you been eating too many sweets? Or, you know, you've got a cavity here, you know. And that makes it way more shocking than him going, I am going to burrow into your nerves of your teeth. You know, that kind of really over the top, the way that like, Nazis are often portrayed in these films.
Oh, does that hurt? I would think it would. Yeah. Does that hurt?
Yeah. But he's talking to him so gently. He's almost got like almost like a bedside manner. And he even says to him, you know, I'm not going to attack, you know, that bad cavity. I'm going to find a healthy cavity, as if he's doing him a favor or something. You know? I love it.
It's totally twisted.
So good. Yeah. So good, man.
I just wanted to mention it wouldn't be a podcast without, the Is It Safe? And just how it's been everywhere. It's in cartoons now when you watch them. And there'll be these scenes that reference that. Even if it's in comedy, it's like these little references that you catch if you're not familiar with Marathon Man.
Well, I was telling you earlier, I saw this film at a frighteningly young age, probably like 12 or 13 or something, and I watched it with my dad. And for about a week after we watched it, whenever we came across each other at home, we would sort of say, "Is it safe?" And I still don't know exactly what it means. Like, the whole point, I think, is to confuse Dustin Hoffman, isn't it? Because obviously they make the assumption, which is probably natural enough, that Doc, after he's stabbed, he makes it to his brother's apartment, but he doesn't actually say anything to him. I think he's about to whisper something. He goes to say something and then dies before he has a chance.
You alluded to just the relationship between Babe and Elsa, and I tend to agree with you that the romantic parts, I'm being super nitpicky, but it also had, Babe kind of actually had to be first exposed. He wasn't delivered everything perfectly. First, it was the female relationship, the trust that he had in her. And she really, symbolizes sort of that loss of his innocence in a gradual way. Then Doc exposes her in the restaurant scene. There's that. And then, doesn't quite understand that. Like, whoa. But Doc plays it off more as, well, she just wants a visa here, even though he knows that there's deeper connections there.
Yeah. On the DVD, there's some rehearsal footage, and it's really interesting because you get about 5 minutes of them improvising that scene, loosely with the dialogue. And all through it, Dustin Hoffman's character is like, I said, it's like a child. It's like two adults and a child. In this rehearsal thing, they're kind of having a slightly cryptic conversation, and Dustin Hoffman keeps saying, "I don't understand why you're saying this," and then he sort of, "I don't understand why she's responding that way." Like, he doesn't know what's going on. Like you said, it's really cool. Now, you want to talk about the scene in the country house, so Zell's brother's house.
Yeah, another great scene.
Yeah.
I think what's awesome about that scene is the drive up to the house. He's out of the muddle of the city. He's into this open. Now he understands what's happening. He's got his father's gun. He knows they're going to come, but it's this long drive up the road to the house that's just way out there. And they go, and it's beautiful cinematography, that wide lens just shot of that, and them going, driving up the driveway. But it's also very cold and dark and adds to the grittiness. It's not like a bright, sunshiny day. It's dark, and he's got this hole in his tooth, and then they come, and something's going to happen, but you don't know how it's going to go down. And there's like this crossfire where Janie shoots Elsa, but the one guy tries to shoot Babe, and then Janie shoots that guy, and then Babe shoots the other guy, and then it's like this crossfire thing that reminds me of something that Tarantino's probably seen a few times and sort of adapted that. Out walks the character, and he's more jaded or more driven than before to finish the marathon. Now he's going to go find Zell. He's going to put an end to it all. He's going to finish it.
Yeah, so we get this great scene in New York, and we said earlier about the two people that recognize Zell. But again, just Laurence Olivier, the way he's just walking down that street with a kind of looking very, very subtly, looking left and right, and brilliant use of New York. I just can't say enough about this. And then Hoffman, of course, says, "Is it safe?" He does that. That has become, unfortunately, a real Hollywood device of repeating a line from earlier in the film. But they really get away with it here because they pull off this trick, but there's nothing nice about it. And he's got the gun. He says to Zell, "They're all dead. Walk down the street, walk down the street." And Zell has just, as you said, slit this guy's throat like it's nothing,
Yeah.
And then he says, "Oh, go and help this man." It's just fantastic. And then they end up at this water treatment facility. And I've got a little bit of trivia here. That water treatment facility took 6 months to put together.
How elaborate.
It's one of those things you can't really believe. I mean, that doesn't mean obviously that they were working solidly on it for 6 months. They're saying that they had it in mind. I don't think it's in the novel. Again, I haven't read it. Robert Towne was a sort of Hollywood legend of that time. He wrote Chinatown. He wrote many other ones as well. And he did lots of uncredited work. And he had the idea of Hoffman making Olivier eat the diamonds.
Mm-hmm.
He says, you can have as many diamonds as you can swallow. You know that line?
Yeah.
And also, what I love the bit where, he's got the suitcase and he's throwing the diamonds. And Laurence Olivier is like, what are you fucking doing? I know I'm a Nazi and I'm a lunatic. But you must be even more of a lunatic. You're diamonds. You know how much these are fucking worth, And it's interesting because it's the only time you see Zell ever really lose control. Even when he's killing people, he doesn't miss a beat, But you see him like scrambling around on the floor. Like this podcast I was listening to, they say like a puppy. He's scrambling around on the floor to try to get a few of these diamonds. I think he eats one of them, and then he says to Hoffman, "No, I am not going to play your game." And then he says something really offensive about his father. Like, I think he said like his father was involved in some shady business as well. Putting the knife in metaphorically.
I was going to say the cool thing is like the floor where he throws the diamonds down. It's like a graded floor with the holes, and the diamonds are like just going into the water. So it's almost like, what was this all for? You have nothing in the end. Now your diamonds and everything you went through, all this, they're falling down through these little holes in the reality. And
yeah, it's just so effective and such a brilliant idea. And I was going to say that in the book, Hoffman takes him to Central Park and shoots him. But apparently, I don't know, they had a problem with the sort of shooting him in cold blood thing. And I don't know what Babe was intending to do in the water facility. But of course, what happens is that Olivier scrambles down the stairs to retrieve the diamonds, and he basically stabs himself with this concealed knife that he's got. And
I love that ending because Zell sort of falls on his own sword. And what he's pursued is just fallen through these cracks. And Babe could have just shot him and killed him and took the diamonds. Babe was like, I don't even care about these fucking diamonds. Yeah. They've created all this problem. Here, you go take the diamonds. And then, Babe didn't need to shoot him because he just fell on his own sword chasing that dream. So I don't know. I think the ending is perfect to the film.
Yeah, that last scene, I am puzzled what his intention might have been. Should you let Zell live, morally? Or perhaps he doesn't care. Perhaps...
I think his intention was to kill him.
Right.
I think that was pretty clear. But I don't think Babe even knew what he was totally going to do. And it didn't really go according to plan either, when he got him in there and then all of a sudden pulls the knife. But there's an uncertainty about it. And you said, what was the expression you used?
On the nose.
On the nose. Yeah, everything doesn't have to be on the nose. Perfect. They tell you everything that and then Babe felt happy after he did it. So it's not like but that's what audiences need now. I don't know if they need that or just that Hollywood thinks they need that. Maybe at that time, the Academy and Hollywood was relevant. They were kind of mavericks at the time. Hollywood's become such a cliche of itself now that it's not about the art anymore. It's about the business, and it's about doing movies we want and agendas we want to do. They become the system that they were bucking at one time. And there are the establishment now.
Yeah. Well, that's where, this Easy Riders Raging Bulls period really ended. I think Heaven's Gate, which I've never seen, which I'm sure we mentioned that on the intro episode, that more or less bankrupted whatever studio that was. And I think the 80s was really where the corporations took over. I mean, the political landscape, Reagan and Thatcher said, they did this very clever thing. Again, I won't go on this tangent now, but of saying, politics is not the answer. So let's just deregulate everything. And big business is the answer, which is, you could say is worse because at least politicians are supposed to be accountable. But, corporations are, well, as far as I know, are not really accountable to anyone. I mean, people have tried to fight back against them. Anyway, can you imagine if there was like a cafe scene with Babe and someone, and Babe was explaining everything he felt? And can you imagine that?
Yeah.
How lame that would have been,
Or a narration or something we need to tell everything.
Yeah.
And I think this film does such a great job of showing. I've always appreciated films that have had an ability to show and make you feel something on a more visceral level or an internal level. We get so much depth of these characters without knowing a whole lot about them. Doc's involved in some kind of espionage. Somebody's trying to kill him, but it's not like beating you over the head. It's letting you sort of absorb it and learn it.
It's also quite easy to lose the audience in that case, where you just confuse the hell out of them. But the plot is intricate, but it kind of hangs on something fairly simple. It's the Nazi with the diamonds. It's the two brothers. One's idealistic. The other one's a more sort of pragmatic businessman. You don't get lost in the plot, I wouldn't say, but it's got plenty of depths. In the last scene, I said, Babe is back in this park where he was running at the beginning, and this time he's strolling, which I thought was very symbolic, and he throws his gun in the river, which to me it felt a bit like a nod back to Dirty Harry, when he throws his badge in the river at the end. It's kind of like, oh, I'm done with this, even though I think Dirty Harry went back to the police, but that's another story. Oh, ironically, even though the fact we're both musicians, the only thing we haven't talked about yet is the music. For me, like, when I think of music in films, I generally don't try to analyze it too much. I have an idea of it, but film music is definitely an art. So how would you describe the music?
I think it's very diverse because it has this eeriness to it, and that's kind of discordant in places. And then there's the dramatic, more discovery type music. All in all, probably pretty melancholy, but it also has a sort of a beauty to the more dramatic musical parts that capture what's happening. And I love the way the music does play a big role in the film, but it's a very subtle role. Sometimes when I watch older films, I would say probably more like 50s and earlier when I watch those films, the score is just like, it's just
melodramatic.
And it's like, oh my gosh, stop with the music. And I think the Marathon Man music is perfectly underneath all of it. Yeah. But it works too in the dramatic parts.
But it's not there all the time. Yeah, like you say,
Right. Yeah, it has this sort of eeriness, and it's used for tension, but it's not overused. And I think a lot of times in film, sometimes the over-dramatic music really works for me. But, if you're just going to create this big thing, the film also has to have a power. So the film that has a power in the scene with a powerful musical expression of the emotions that are happening, it can really bring something out. But I think that this music, you remember the music, certain melodies to me, I've watched the film a couple weeks ago, aren't coming to mind right away, but I'm sure if I put the movie on, I would go, I'd probably hum the tune. I'd probably hum some of the melodies that have happened. And I think that doesn't overshadow the film. It accompanies it and strengthens it in a non-intrusive way. It doesn't tell you, like, wait, here's the sad scene. Here's the happy scene. Boom. Everything is not, it's very understated and but very well done.
I don't remember any of it. I couldn't whistle you any melodies. Whereas, with, Rocky in the same year, so I really like the original. But then you've got like some quite melancholic piano music in Rocky, actually, at the beginning when he's walking around Philadelphia and he's sort of washed up fighter and everything.
It has a gentleness to it, but then a triumphant feel.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Wow. Fantastic. Yeah, I think we got through everything I had here. It's great.
I think so.
I've rated all my films as you have on IMDb, and it's nice to have that kind of list there. So I don't really do 10 out of 10s, to be honest, but this is pretty damn good, and it got better the more I was watching it. And I feel like, and I've said this on other shows before, it's almost got better during this conversation we've had, you know. It's
Definitely.
just very, very effective, and I just highly recommend it, really. It's probably not a great film to watch if you're maybe having a dark period in your life. I mean, you know, it's quite bleak. But
well, if you want a thriller movie, this film just has that thriller edge to it. It's shocking, it's exciting, but it's very intelligent and very well calculated, and it works. But you have to pay attention in this movie too to get. I mean, you and I have seen this film probably a handful of times, and so we're familiar. If you've seen it 4 or 5 times, then you watch it again, you're reminded of all these things that you've come to know. But when you're a first view, you kind of have to sit and be ready to kind of pay attention. It's very nuanced.
I mean, like I said earlier, I mean, I imagine that most people who listen to a film podcast, particularly something like this, probably have seen the film. But perhaps if you've seen the film once and you kind of thought, well, I'd like to hear some people talking about it. If you're going to go back to the film, I would say, yeah, absolutely, pay attention. You know, not that I want to tell people how to watch films, but there is so much detail here. And I've probably seen this film, probably 5 or 6 times. Not for a long time, I must say, but it was fairly familiar to me. But it's definitely one where each time you watch it, maybe an extra layer will be found.
Absolutely.
So in summary, I just, massive recommendation. 3 brilliant, well, even 4 or 5 great performances. But I'd say particularly those 3. Dustin Hoffman, Laurence, Olivier, Roy Scheider.
Career level work, for sure. Pretty powerful.
I think if people have seen Midnight Cowboy, again, I wouldn't say they're similar films. Like the story is nothing similar, but they both use New York in that way, and it's got that naturalistic. And like we said in the intro episode, that really comes from the fact that, I don't know if Schlesinger went to film school, but all these other guys, that whole thing comes from, you know, Russian films, German films, Italian.
Yeah.
All right, we could probably go an infinite amount of time discussing this, but just a huge recommendation, really. And, you know, if you haven't explored that 70s period, I really would recommend it. You know, if you like your realism. Yeah, they call it paranoia. I call it a reality, but you can decide, you know, you can decide what label you want to put on it. So thanks a lot for being on the show again. And thanks to everybody for listening. And I'll be back. I'm establishing another podcast, like I said. So I'm going to say this will probably be a monthly show, possibly every 3 weeks, but I don't really want to commit to more frequent than that because I've got a lot of other stuff going on. But I'm sure you'll be on the show again soon. We're going to do The Wall at some point. That might be our next one. So we've got that musical element that we can bring in.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I really appreciate you having me back on, and always enjoy our discussions. And I always learn something just from you and I talking, and, you know, it opens up my mind on a personal level. So I really appreciate it.
All right, no problem. Yeah, thanks again to everyone for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
Is it safe?
Yes, it's safe. It's very safe. It's so safe you wouldn't believe it.